She was sent to ruin the most dangerous man in the city. But the moment he looked at her, the mission stopped feeling simple. Vicky Moore was trained to be a ghost, invisible, precise, lethal. Her objective was clear: infiltrate the inner circle of Kang Ji-hoon, the Iron Dragon of the underworld, and steal the keys that would collapse his empire. Ji-hoon was a man carved from danger, jagged edges, cold control, untouchable. A shadow ruler whispered about, but never confronted. Then they met. Under neon rain, where the city bled color and the air didn't just crackle, it burned. And everything shifted. The predator had a code. The monster had a soul. And the intel she gathered started to feel like a noose tightening around her own neck. To save her family, she must ruin him. To save him, she must betray the very mission that made her.
Before we continue, we welcome you to AFRO-KOREAN Love Thrillers, the home of dark romance, forbidden passion, power, betrayal, and captivating revenge stories. Please do me a favor. Tap that comment section and tell us quickly where you are watching from. Stay tuned. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel so you don't miss any new thriller that drops here. Sit back and relax because this story is just getting started. Now let's get back to our story.
The scent of expensive sandalwood and bitter matcha hung heavy in the air of the private tea room, a stark contrast to the neon-drenched chaos of Seoul just 30 floors below. Vicky Moore smoothed the fabric of her pencil skirt, her fingers grazing the microscopic camera hidden in her lapel. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs, but her face remained a mask of professional indifference. She was no longer a field agent. She was an expert linguist with a spotless resume and a deadly secret. The sliding door shivered open. Kang Ji-hoon didn't walk into a room, he commanded it. He was dressed in a charcoal suit that looked like armor, his dark hair swept back to reveal eyes that were as cold and reflective as obsidian. He didn't speak immediately. He sat across from her, his movements fluid and predatory, and began the ritual of the tea. "They say you speak 4 dialects of Korean, Miss Moore," he said, his voice a low, gravelly hum that vibrated in the small space. He didn't look up from the ceramic bowl. "And that you can translate a man's intent before he even finishes his sentence." "Words are just a veil, Mr. Kong," Vicky replied, her voice steady despite the way the air seemed to thin around him. "I prefer to look at what lies beneath them." Ji-hoon paused, the bamboo whisk hovering over the green froth. He looked up, and for a second Vicky forgot to breathe. Up close, his presence was overwhelming, a magnetic field of danger and absolute authority. His gaze swept over her, not with the typical hunger of a powerful man, but with the calculated scrutiny of a jeweler looking for a flaw in a diamond. "Is that so?" He leaned forward, the distance between them shrinking until she could smell the faint, sharp scent of rain on his skin. He reached out, his hand hovering inches from her face, before his fingers caught a loose strand of her hair and tucked it behind her ear. The contact was brief, but it felt like a brand. His skin was warm, a startling contrast to the icy aura he projected. "And what do you see when you look at me, Vicky Moore?" The use of her name was a warning. The mission was supposed to be simple: watch, record, and betray. But as she looked into the dark depths of his eyes, she felt a sudden, terrifying pull. This wasn't just a target. This was a storm. "I see a man who doesn't trust the words he pays for," she whispered. A ghost of a smirk touched his lips, sharp, fleeting, and devastating. "Correct. I trust actions." He pushed the tea bowl toward her. "Drink. Our guests from the Triad arrive in 10 minutes. Let's see if your tongue is as sharp as your eyes." As Vicky took the bowl, her fingers brushed his. A spark of pure, forbidden electricity jolted through her, a silent alarm screaming that she was already in too deep. The mission had begun, but as Ji-hoon watched her with a look that was half challenge and half invitation, she felt the most dangerous thing in this room wasn't his empire. It was the way he made her want to burn it all down just to stay in his shadow. The tea room's tranquility was a fading dream as Vicky followed Ji-hoon into the bowels of a concrete warehouse on the city's edge. The air here was different, damp, smelling of rusted iron and old oil. This was the Iron Dragon's true domain, far from the polished marble of his penthouse. In the center of the room, a man was strapped to a chair, his face a roadmap of bruises. Ji-hoon's lieutenants stood back like gargoyles, their faces carved from stone. Ji-hoon didn't remove his blazer. He simply unbuttoned his cuffs and rolled them back with a terrifying rhythmic precision. "Translate," Ji-hoon commanded, his voice devoid of the warmth she'd felt in the tea room. The prisoner spat a jagged sentence in a rough Mandarin dialect, his eyes wide with terror. Vicky's stomach turned, but she kept her voice flat. "He says he didn't leak the shipment coordinates. He claims his brother was framed." Ji-hoon stepped into the light, his shadow stretching long and monstrous across the floor. He picked up a heavy fountain pen from a side table, an elegant tool meant for signing contracts, now looking like a weapon. "Tell him," Ji-hoon whispered, leaning close to the man's ear, "that in this family, blood doesn't buy mercy, it only buys a quicker end." As Vicky translated the death sentence, her heart hammered against her ribs. She was recording every word, every face, every bit of evidence the agency needed to bury him. But then the prisoner lunged, a hidden blade flashing in his hand. Before the guards could move, Ji-hoon moved with the grace of a predator, disarming the man with a sickening crack of bone. The prisoner collapsed, groaning. Vicky flinched, her composure finally fracturing. Ji-hoon turned. The lethal coldness in his eyes flickered as they landed on her. He stepped over the fallen man, walking straight toward her until she was backed against the cold brick wall. She expected his fury, but instead he reached out, his thumb brushing a stray drop of blood off her cheek, blood that wasn't hers. "You're trembling, Vicky," he murmured, his voice a low, intimate caress that didn't match the violence of the room. He stepped closer, shielding her view of the broken man behind him. "Is the reality too loud for you, or is it the lie you're telling yourself?" The protective gesture was a physical blow. He was a monster, a man who broke bones as easily as he drank tea, yet he was standing there, acting as her sanctuary against the very horror he created. "I'm fine," he lied, her voice breathless. "Liars have a specific scent, Vicky. You smell like fear and expensive perfume. It's a dangerous combination." He lingered for a second too long, the tension between them pulling like a tide, before he turned back to his men. "Clean this up. Miss Moore has seen enough for one night." As he walked away, Vicky realized with a jolt of terror that she wasn't just afraid of him anymore. She was afraid of how much she wanted him to turn back around. The penthouse was a cage of glass and gravity, suspended so high above Seoul that the cars below looked like a slow-moving river of molten gold. Inside, the silence was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic hum of the high-tech filtration system. Vicky stood in the center of the living room, her breath shallow. Ji-hoon was in the master suite, not asleep, but distracted by a late-night call with the Tokyo syndicate. This was her window. She moved with the fluid grace of a shadow, her bare feet silent on the cold marble. Her target was the biometric scanner embedded in the mahogany desk of his private study. The agency didn't just want data, they wanted his signature, the digital ghost of his thumbprint that could authorize the transfer of his black market holdings. She reached the desk, her heart thumping against her ribs like a trapped bird. She pulled the cloning device from the hidden pocket of her silk robe. It was a small, translucent gel pad designed to lift a latent print and digitize it in seconds.
Her hands trembled as she hovered over the glass sensor. "Focus more," she hissed at herself. "He's a target, nothing more." But her mind betrayed her, flashing back to the warmth of his hand on her cheek in the warehouse. She forced the image away, pressing the gel pad to the scanner. The device pulsed a soft, rhythmic blue. 10%, 40%, 70%. "The view is better from the balcony, Vicky." The voice was a low vibration that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Vicky didn't scream, she was too well trained for that, but her blood turned to ice. She didn't pull her hand away, she couldn't. She slowly turned her head. Ji-hoon was leaning against the doorframe, his dress shirt unbuttoned at the collar, a glass of amber liquid dangling from his fingers. He didn't look angry, he looked disappointed, which was infinitely worse. "I was looking for a pen," she lied, her voice a brittle thread, "to write down the notes for tomorrow's meeting." Ji-hoon walked toward her, his footsteps heavy and deliberate. He didn't look at the desk, he only looked at her. He stopped inches away, the heat radiating from his body mocking the cold sweat on her neck. He set his glass down and reached out, his hand covering hers and the cloning device on the scanner. "You're a terrible liar for someone so beautiful," he whispered. He leaned in, his lips brushing the shell of her ear, sending a jolt of pure fire through her nerves. He didn't pull her hand away. Instead, he pressed his weight into hers, helping her hold the device steady against the glass. "If you wanted my soul, Vicky, you didn't have to steal it," he murmured, his grip tightening just enough to be a caress and a restraint all at once. The device chimed 100%. The betrayal was complete, but as Ji-hoon's other hand slid around her waist, pulling her flush against him, Vicky realized she was the one who was truly caught. The transition from the penthouse to the rain-slicked streets of Seoul was a blur of adrenaline and shattered glass. The agency hadn't waited for Vicky to signal. They had tracked the biometric upload and moved in for the kill, sending a tactical team to scrub the site. The very people she worked for had just tried to bury her along with their target. Now, Vicky found herself ducking behind a row of steaming food stalls in a crowded night market, her hand locked in Ji-hoon's. The smell of spicy tteokbokki and grilled meat masked the scent of gun smoke, but the danger was a palpable hum in the air. "They aren't my men," Ji-hoon said, his voice a calm blade cutting through her panic. He pulled her deeper into the shadows of a narrow alley, pressing her back against a brick wall damp with humidity. "And they aren't the rival families. Those were professionals, government grade." Vicky's breath hitched. She couldn't tell him the truth, that they were her professionals, but the way he looked at her, his eyes searching hers with a terrifyingly sharp intelligence, suggested he already knew. "We need to move," she whispered, her eyes darting to the end of the alley where a black SUV had just skidded to a halt. "We?" Ji-hoon's grip on her wrist tightened, not to hurt, but to anchor. "You had what you came for, Vicky. You have my thumbprint. You could have run the other way when the first flashbang went off. Why are you still holding my hand?" The question was a trap, one more dangerous than the men hunting them. She looked at him, really looked at him, standing in the neon glow of a flickering open sign. He was the villain of the story she'd been told, but he was the only one who hadn't tried to kill her tonight. "Because the people who sent me don't leave witnesses," she confessed, the truth tasting like copper in her mouth. A ghost of a smile, grim and knowing, touched his lips. "Then it's a good thing I've spent my life learning how to survive the people who want me dead." He reached into his waistband, pulling a sleek, silenced pistol and handing it to her handle first. It was an act of absolute, suicidal trust. "The market leads to the subway tunnels," he commanded. "Stay low. If anyone breathes in your direction, you don't ask for translation, you answer with steel." As they surged back into the chaos of the crowd, the line between hunter and prey vanished. Vicky Moore, the ghost agent, was gone. In her place was a woman running through a neon labyrinth side by side with a monster she was beginning to realize might be her only chance at survival. The roar of the city faded into a hollow, rhythmic thrum as they descended toward the Han River. The air beneath the bridge was cold and tasted of salt and wet concrete. Far above, the tires of late-night commuters hummed over the expansion joints, a world away from the two shadows huddled in the darkness. Ji-hun stopped near a rusted pylon, the orange glow of the distant skyline catching the sharp line of his jaw. He didn't look like a Mafia kingpin in the half-light. He looked like a man carrying the weight of 1,000 secrets. "You're wondering why I haven't killed you yet," he said, his voice echoing softly against the massive concrete pillars. Vicky kept the pistol he'd given her lowered, but her finger remained near the trigger guard. The thought crossed my mind. "You know I'm the one who opened your gates for them." "You were a tool, Vicky. I don't blame the blade. I blame the hand that swings it." He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "Your father was a man named Thomas Moore. He was an operative in this city 20 years ago, before the agency retired him." Vicky froze. The air in her lungs felt like lead. "How do you know that name? My father died in a car accident when I was 10. That's why I joined, to honor the service he gave." Ji-hun stepped closer, ignoring the weapon in her hand. He reached into his inner pocket and pulled out an old, weathered photograph encased in plastic. He handed it to her. In the grainy image, a younger Ji-hun stood next to a tall, tired-looking Westerner. They weren't fighting. They were sharing a cigarette in a rain-slicked alleyway much like this one. "It wasn't an accident," Ji-hun said quietly. "The agency retired him because he discovered they weren't dismantling empires, they were taking them over. They sent you here to finish his work because they knew your loyalty would be blind. They didn't send you to stop a criminal, Vicky. They sent you to clear the path for a much larger monster." Vicky looked from the photo to the man standing before her. The world she had built her life upon, the binary of good and evil, law and chaos, shattered into 1,000,000 jagged pieces. Her handlers hadn't been protecting her family. They had been holding them hostage under the guise of patriotism. "Why tell me this now?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Because the agency is coming for the red folder in my vault. The folder that contains your father's final report. They don't want me dead, Vicky. They want the evidence I've been keeping for 20 years to protect you." Before she could respond, the red dot of a laser sight danced across Ji-hun's chest. The red dot was a heartbeat on Ji-hun's chest. Vicky didn't think, she reacted. She lunged, her shoulder slamming into him, knocking them both behind the massive concrete pylon, just as a suppressed round whistled through the air, chipping the stone where his head had been a second before. "Target identified, moving to intercept," a voice crackled from a comms unit abandoned in the grass. Vicky knew that voice. It belonged to Director Miller, the man who had sat at her kitchen table and promised to protect her family. Heavy boots crunched on the gravel. From the shadows emerged a silhouette draped in tactical gear, the moonlight catching the silver hair of a man who looked more like a college professor than a killer. Miller stepped into the open, a specialized rifle cradled in his arms. He didn't look at Ji-hun. He looked at Vicky. "You've been compromised, Moore," Miller said, his tone as casual as if they were in a briefing room. "The Iron Dragon is a master of psychological warfare. Whatever lie he told you about your father, it's just poison meant to slow your trigger finger." "He has the photo, Miller," Vicky shouted, her back pressed against the cold pylon, her hand gripping the gun Ji-hun had given her. "He has the report. Why didn't you tell me my father was murdered by his own team?" Miller sighed, a sound of genuine disappointment. "Because some truths are too heavy for children to carry. Your father was a patriot until he became a liability. Don't make the same mistake. Step away from Kang and we can still go home." Ji-hoon leaned close to Vicky, his voice a low, dangerous silk. "He's lying. He has 3 shooters on the perimeter. If you step out, they'll kill us both and call it a tragic crossfire." Vicky looked at the gun in her hand, the weapon given to her by the man she was sent to destroy, and then at the man who had raised her in the shadow of the agency. The forbidden attraction she felt for Ji-hoon wasn't just chemistry anymore. It was the only honest thing left in her world. "I'm not going back," Vicky said, her voice turning to ice. Miller's face hardened, the mask of the father figure slipping to reveal the predator beneath. "I figured as much. You always did have your father's stubbornness. It's a shame it's terminal." He raised his rifle. In that split second, the bridge didn't feel like a hiding spot. It felt like a tomb.
The roar of the river was replaced by the silence of the mountains. Ji-hoon led her to a hidden hanok, a traditional Korean house tucked deep into the cedar forests outside the city. Here, the paper walls and ancient wood were a sanctuary against the digital reach of the agency. There were no cameras, no signals, only the scent of pine and the faint blue smoke of incense curling toward the rafters. Vicky sat on the heated floor, her hands finally beginning to shake. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the bridge escape had evaporated, leaving behind a cold, hollow terror. Across from her, Ji-hoon was stripping off his ruined suit jacket. His white shirt was stained with a mixture of river water and the blood of his enemies. "They won't find us here," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "This land belonged to my grandmother. It doesn't exist on any map Miller has." Vicky looked up, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "My whole life, everything I worked for was a lie. They used my grief to turn me into a weapon against the only man who knew the truth." Ji-hoon moved toward her, his presence no longer a threat, but a gravity she couldn't resist. He knelt before her, his large hands reaching out to steady her trembling ones. The touch was electric, a grounded heat that pulled her back from the edge of a breakdown. "You are not a weapon, Vicky," he murmured, his gaze holding hers with a fierce, possessive clarity. He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. The covenant of smoke wasn't a contract or a mission. It was this, the silent promise of 2 outcasts in a world that wanted them dead. The forbidden pull she had felt since that first night in the tea room finally snapped. Vicky reached up, her fingers tangling in the hair at the nape of his neck, and pulled him the last few inches. The kiss was desperate, tasting of salt and survival. It was a collision of 2 worlds that should never have touched. In the quiet of the hanok, as the smoke drifted above them, Vicky realized that she had stopped being a spy long ago. But as Ji-hoon pulled her closer, his hand resting on the small of her back, she felt something hard beneath his shirt. Not a weapon, a folder. The red folder, the evidence that could end Miller, but would also mark them for death forever. The fire in the center of the room crackled, casting long, dancing shadows against the paper walls. Ji-hoon didn't say a word as he handed her the folder. The cardstock was worn, stained at the edges by time and dampness. On the cover, a faded stamp read, "Project Moonlight, Eyes Only." Vicky's breath hitched as she opened it. The first thing she saw wasn't a report, but a handwritten note. "To my little bird, Vicky. If you're reading this, the world didn't get any kinder." The handwriting was unmistakably her father's, slanting, hurried, and full of the warmth she'd forgotten. As she turned the pages, the horror unfolded. Her father hadn't been a rogue agent. He had discovered that the agency was funding its operations by protecting the very syndicates they claimed to be fighting. Kang Ji-hoon's father had been the only one willing to help him expose the corruption. "They killed my father for his silence," Ji-hoon said, his voice a low, steady anchor in the room. "And they killed yours for his noise. My family took over the Iron Dragon name not to build an empire of crime, but to build a fortress that the agency couldn't penetrate." Vicky stared at the final page. It was a list of names.
current directors, senators, and handlers. Miller's name was at the very top. The mission she'd been given wasn't just a hit, it was a cleanup operation. She was the last loose end in a 20-year-old conspiracy. "They never intended for me to come back," Vicky whispered, the realization cutting deeper than any blade. "No," Ji-hoon said, moving behind her. He placed his hands on her shoulders, his grip firm and grounding. The intimacy of the moment was shattered by a low, rhythmic thrumming in the distance. Not thunder, not the wind. Rotors. Vicky looked at the digital watch she'd taken from a fallen agent. The agency had tracked the folder's internal RFID tag the moment it was removed from its lead-lined casing. They had less than 5 minutes before the mountain was swarmed. "We can't win a standoff here," Vicky said, her training kicking back in, though her heart was still breaking. "We aren't standing off," Ji-hoon replied, his eyes ignited with a lethal, predatory light. "We're going back to the city, Vicky, to the den."
The skyline of Seoul was a jagged silhouette of cold steel and flickering neon as they breached the perimeter of the Dragon's Den. But the agency was already there. What was once a sanctuary of leather and mahogany had been transformed into a kill zone. The scent of expensive cologne was choked out by the acrid stench of cordite and the ozone of fried security systems. "Stay behind the marble," Ji-hoon commanded, his voice a calm, lethal rasp over the stutter of submachine gun fire. He moved with a terrifying efficiency, a king defending his throne. He wasn't just fighting for his empire anymore. He was fighting for the woman who held the truth in her hands. Vicky crouched behind the massive executive desk, the red folder tucked against her ribs. This was her world now, the high-octane intersection of betrayal and bullet casings. She checked the magazine of her stolen rifle. 12 rounds left. Miller's men were pouring through the shattered glass of the atrium, tactical lights cutting through the smoke like predatory eyes. "Vicky, give us the folder and this ends," Miller's voice boomed through a megaphone from the corridor. "Don't die for a man who would have sold you for a shipment of heroin a month ago." Vicky looked at Ji-hoon. He was reloading, his face streaked with soot and blood, his eyes never leaving the doorway. He didn't defend himself against the lie. He didn't have to. The way he had stood over her when the first grenade detonated, using his own body as a shield, was the only testimony she needed. "The only thing ending today is your career, Miller," Vicky shouted back. She stood, not with the hesitation of a spy, but with the conviction of a survivor. She began to upload the folder's contents to a global encrypted server using Ji-hoon's high-speed terminal. 40%, 60%. "They're breaching the north wall," Ji-hoon yelled as diving toward her a swarm of black-clad operatives burst through the wreckage. The room exploded into chaos. Vicky fired back to back, her vision narrowing to the sights of her weapon. She saw the shock on the agents' faces. They had expected a victim, but not a partner. Beside her, Ji-hoon was a whirlwind of violence, his movements synchronized with hers as if they had been fighting together for lifetimes. The terminal chimed. Upload complete. Vicky looked at Ji-hoon, a triumphant smile breaking through the grime on her face. But the smile died instantly. Behind Ji-hoon, among the fallen, a shadow rose. It was Miller's second in command, his weapon leveled at Ji-hoon's exposed back. "Ji-hoon, move!"
The air in the vault was thick with the smell of scorched metal and the metallic tang of blood. The gunshot echoed like a thunderclap in the confined space. Vicky's scream was silenced by the sight of Ji-hoon staggering forward. The bullet had caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around. Before the assassin could fire again, Vicky's reflexes took over. 2 shots, precise and cold, dropped the shooter where he stood. She scrambled across the debris, sliding on her knees to reach Ji-hoon's side. "Ji-hoon, look at me, stay with me." He slumped against the reinforced steel of the vault, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Blood, dark and hot, soaked through his white shirt, staining Vicky's hands as she pressed them against the wound. He looked up at her, his obsidian eyes hazy with pain, but burning with an intensity that terrified her. "The data," he wheezed, his hand gripping her wrist. "It's gone, Ji-hoon," she whispered, tears carving tracks through the suit on her face. "The world knows, Ji-hoon. It's over." "Not for us," a cold, familiar voice drifted from the doorway. Miller stepped over the bodies of his men, his face a mask of ruined ambition. He held a single suppressed pistol, his finger tightening on the trigger. "You've destroyed 20 years of work, Vicky. You've burned the agency. You've burned your future. Was he worth it?" Vicky started to reach for her weapon, but Miller's aim was true. "Don't. I'll kill you before you even touch the grip." Ji-hoon let out a low, guttural laugh, coughing up blood. "She didn't burn it alone, Miller. I gave her the match, and I'd do it again." Miller sneered, leveling the barrel at Ji-hoon's forehead. "Then you can die together." Suddenly, the building groaned. The charges Ji-hoon's lieutenants had set as a failsafe finally detonated in the lower levels. The floor tilted violently. Miller stumbled, his shot going wide and shattering a glass display case. Vicky didn't hesitate. She lunged, but not for her gun. She grabbed a jagged shard of reinforced glass from the floor and drove it into Miller's thigh. As he screamed and collapsed, she didn't finish him. She didn't have time. She pulled Ji-hoon's arm over her shoulder, hauling his dead weight toward the private elevator. The sound of sirens and helicopters was deafening now, a cacophony of the law arriving to find a massacre. "We have to go," she sobbed, dragging him into the lift. As the doors began to hiss shut, Ji-hoon reached up, his bloody fingers cupping her jaw. He looked at her, not as a boss or a target, but as a man who had finally found something worth losing everything for. "Vicky," he whispered, his eyes beginning to close. "If we make it, the dragon is dead. There is only Ji-hoon." The elevator jolts, descending into the dark as the building above them begins to cave in. The elevator reaches the sub-garage, but as the doors open, a dozen tactical lights blind them. A voice commands, "Hands in the air." Vicky looks down at the unconscious Ji-hoon, then at the soldiers. She realizes they aren't agency. They're the national police. She has the evidence to clear their names, but can she save his life before the law takes him away?
If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe. It really helps the channel grow and lets you know when new videos drop. Lastly, and turn on notifications so you never miss a video.